I care about three things, and only three things. First thing I care about is operation resilience. How do I ensure that the blockchain keeps running, keeps building blocks? So since 2017, Cardano has not missed a beat, right? The second thing I care about is a mix between education and regulation. When I travel the world and I meet regulators and policymakers and all those people who can actually, with the swoosh of a pen, make it illegal to work on a blockchain, right? I need to tell them that this has real value.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Brazil Crypto Report. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today we have a very special episode discussing Cardano's presence in the Latin America region. To tell us all about this, I'm joined by Frederik Gregaard, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Cardano Foundation. Frederik, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Such an honor.
Amazing. So before we dive into substantive conversation here, I was listening to an interview you gave recently where you mentioned that you were like 99.9% Viking heritage, which I found quite compelling.
Yeah, well, basically it was, as many people, we think a lot about science, right? And we think about, how do we actually, it could be quite cool to do a DNA test, but being a little bit more libertarian and being a bit more careful about, my privacy and my data. It was actually quite hard to find a data platform or find a DNA platform where you don't have to send a driver license or have to send something, who basically identifies you. Because what you don't want to get to is a situation that, a centralized company has a full DNA profile, including, like personal identifying information like a driver license, a passport copy. So I chose a provider. And when it came back, it basically says I was 99.7 or something like that, Scandinavian/Viking. And I thought that was... not really surprised about that. And then when my wife started looking through that, she started laughing because, there was so many factors where she's like, oh, it says you're bald. I was like, yeah, well, no kidding, this is your eye color. I was like, yeah, no kidding, It was kind of interesting, actually, what they can spin out of that these days.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, the reason I find it intriguing is just because I'm from the state of Minnesota, where we have a very strong Viking heritage, right? It's like our American football team is called the Vikings. We have the world's tallest Viking statue. It's just something you encounter a lot. Like the high school teams are all called the Vikings, right? It's something you encounter a lot in Minnesota Scandinavian culture. So it's quite interesting to meet somebody who's an actual Viking. Like I don't think I've ever. You're probably the closest thing to a real Viking I've ever met. So I'm very, very honored to be talking to you right now.
Yeah.
Quite flattering, right?
I haven't been in Denmark for a long time, right? But some of my good friends in Denmark, they actually do the religion part as well, which is kind of interesting, right? Because some of these old religions seems to be coming back a little bit. And it's kind of interesting how they look at the world. Also, when you start thinking about quantum computing and science and so on, because suddenly it's not so odd, actually, that you have different dimensions anymore, right? And when you start thinking about that, you're like, why would a guy in blockchain actually care about that? And well, one of the reasons is that the Cardano Foundation actually just launched an identity wallet, which has some quantum security in it. And the Cardano Foundation and Cardano in general are working with Ethereum and the Ethereum Foundation about how we make the whole internet and whole enterprise architecture quantum secure, right? So we're actually sharing academic research. And then suddenly you're thinking, hey, what am I doing in my spare time? And why am I thinking about, different religions and Valhalla and, how, you crossed over to those dimensions and how you actually see the modern quantum compute theorem. And suddenly some things are adding up. It gets very...
We're getting very deep here. We're getting very philosophical and techno-optimist deep here. I like it. Well, maybe that's a good segue here to talk a bit more about Cardano Foundation specifically. And I know a lot of people are familiar with Charles Hoskinson. A lot of people are familiar with ADA or ADA, however you want to call it, the cryptocurrency, which is obviously a top 10 coin. But give us maybe a TLDR on the foundation itself and what your role is in the Cardano ecosystem.
Yes. So the Cardano Foundation is a Swiss non-for-profit foundation. This is a model who's been used by many, many blockchains and is basically coming out of the 2015 Ethereum Foundation blueprint, which was made by a Swiss law firm who basically were looking at how do you create a protective element between an ICO issuing entity, public permissionless blockchain, and the world of regulation. However, Cardano is using it differently. So the reason why the Cardano Foundation was chosen under this sort of incorporation as a Swiss non-for-profit foundation was because they were looking at, we need an entity where certain volatility, either in the price of the asset or in the regulatory environment or in user behavior or in enterprise adoption or emerging technologies would not force them to change a different path. So what's really unique about this kind of setup is that we've not done an ICO out of the Cardano Foundation. We don't control the burning or minting of ADA. It's pronounced ADA because it comes from Ada Lovelace, which basically was the world's first computer programmer. So it's actually, there's quite a lot of meaning to it. So it's definitely not ADA, it's Ada, the name.
Oh, it is. Oh, it is officially Ada. Okay,
it is Ada, the name. And Ada Lovelace was the first, not just computer programmer, but she was also female, which is one of the things we stand very heavily on in Cardano. We really think about equal opportunity, and we really think about how do you actually get the 2 billion people who don't have the economic opportunities or identity as we take for granted. How do you get them access to the technology we take for granted and give them these kind of opportunities? Not equal outcome, but equal opportunities. It's a very sort of specific thing about our vision and mission. So we took this very seriously. And the reason why we use this foundation setup is because we optimize towards long-term economic output. So if you think about a shareholding company today, right, the CEO would look at next month's quarterly earnings, or when do we pay out yields, or you're being measured based on the share price, right? And the share price is constantly moving depending on the perception of the market compared to your business model. And what we needed as an ecosystem is we needed an institution who are fighting the 10-20 year roadmap, not the how do we win tomorrow, but how do we become relevant in 20 years' time? How do we stay relevant through that? And how do we ensure that if you're going to put a nation state on Cardano, or if you want to create a complete new nation state, which is basically what is happening right now, we are the world's largest DAO, 9 million inhabitants, right? With a 1.5 billion ADA treasury, right? What does that even look like? And how do we ensure that it also works tomorrow and the day after and the day after, right? And so the idea with the Cardano Foundation was that you have this beautiful type of incorporation where the executives, including the board members, has personal liability, which is a little bit scary, right? So we have, even though we follow the law completely, I am 100% personal liable if we go away from the original intent of why Cardano Foundation was set up, which is the promotion of third generation blockchains for the long time X of adoption, right? And why is that interesting? It's really interesting because that basically means that we should be, this is where I get a lot of pushback sometimes, we should actually be very predictable. So we actually have an 8 to 10 year strategy. We have a 3-year OPEX. We have a tactical implementation plan, which is built bottom up and top down every year. We communicate that extremely widely. We put our balance sheet and our earnings statement on the blockchain. So if you want to see what I pay in rent here in the office I'm in now, you can go on the Cardano blockchain and check that out, right? So we have what's called an activity report, which a lot of people don't read because it's a PDF, more like a old style format. But we do that because we want to anchor this, in time. We want to do a snapshot and say, what did we do last year? And what did we spend of resources on that? Because it also creates a benchmark for the community to go in and say, okay, we have this decentralized treasury. Somebody is suggesting to build a new programming language for smart contracts. What did the Cardano Foundation spend on building Icon? And then you have a benchmark, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't have a benchmark and you just don't know, you have to guess, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to capture as many data points as possible and make them verifiable on the blockchain to ensure that we not only are predictable, but we are optimizing towards Cardano in 2050 or 2040, which is insane when you think about it. Like Ethereum is 10 years old, right? So how can we even start thinking about like 20, 30 years? And the reason for that is that, large companies, complex systems like NGOs, political environments, if you want to build sewage systems and dams and, you want to secure, what's happening if a meteorite might hit the earth, right? You don't think in the next 3 months earnings, right? You start thinking in decades. And I think that's where blockchain really belongs. Blockchain belongs in the space where we think about it as a public infrastructure, which is the security anchor for us to enable to use artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, have real accountability towards our politicians, have the right data points in a world where we go on the line every day and we don't even know if it's true what we're reading, but it's so interesting, right? How do we verify if that is the truth, right? So, and that's the space where I really truly believe third generation blockchain to be in. And in order for them to be in that kind of space, you cannot have a type of incorporation who is championing that, which you can take over tomorrow because something goes wrong on the short time scale. You need to ensure you have something which is accountable to the limit. 100% personal liability is pretty scary, right? Secondly, you need to have something where I can't just change direction tomorrow. I have to follow something which was set out by the original founders, that this is the intent. And just because, the world is changing, you should not change, right? But this doesn't work in isolation because I cannot predict the next 10 years, right? So this, with next to us, there's multiple commercial companies such as Charles's company, which is a for-profit company, right? Such as the other founder, Ken Kodama-san, running Imurgo, right? Such as DC Spark, such as, 5 Binaries. There's multiple companies around Cardano, which is looking at the short-term adoption piece, right? Or short-term usage or short-term building. And if you put that down into the elevator speech, right? I care about 3 things, and only 3 things. First thing I care about is operation resilience. How do I ensure that the blockchain keeps running, keeps building blocks? So since 2017, Cardano has not missed a beat, right? We've been through, nation state attacks. We've been through DDoS attacks. We've been through wrong, transactions, etc., and we're still running high. The second thing I care about is, and a part of that is also economic incentives, right? That the stake pool operators and the stakers and the security level and all those things. The other thing I care about is a mix between education and regulation, because when I travel the world and I meet regulators and policymakers and all those people who can actually, with the swoosh of a pen, make it illegal to work on a blockchain, right? I need to tell them that this has real value, not PowerPoint value, not like asserted value somewhere after you're done being a politician or a policymaker, but it has real value. And real value is normally in this world measured by, job creation or GDP or things like that. And what's really interesting about Cardano is that we have so many different industries who can be transformed and are being transformed today by using blockchain. But very frequently, we only look at one lens, which is cryptocurrencies. And that is amazing alone, right? But Cardano was not made to be a competition to Bitcoin. Cardano was made to be an enablement of the asset class of Bitcoin, but also the other use cases, such as medtech, such as identity, such as track and trace, and some of the other things we're going to talk about later in this podcast, right? And so this education/regulation piece is extremely important to ensure that we can keep being relevant also in the future to come. And that's why I'm a part of negotiating MiCA. You probably saw I was a couple of weeks back at the House of Lords. You probably want to speak about the US Treasury reserves and other things, right? And last but not least, I care a lot about adoption. But not just adoption in terms of one use case, because, Cardano DeFi, for instance, is extremely interesting from other ecosystems because it's extremely secure. It's very well thought through, but it has a lot less liquidity than maybe an Ethereum or Solana. So what's better, a big TVL, and you say, oh, I'm the DeFi ecosystem of the world? Or is it better that you have diversity and security in your DeFi layer, and that you also have track and trace, and you have, all sorts of other use cases? And what we try to think about specifically as the Cardano Foundation is, if it's hard and you can't earn money on it, you might go to jail, or it has high liability, or there's no economic incentives in it. Somebody needs to go first. And the people who go first, if they end up being a unicorn, like being an incredible profitable company, well, it's actually a little bit counterproductive towards the ecosystem. So what we think about is, how do we show people that it can be done, or enable people to do this, but we don't want to own it. So what we do in the Cardano Foundation, which is very hard, is we are building to make an impact in the next 10 years, but we are building to die. We are not planning on staying forever. We are the only actor in Cardano who is actually working towards sort of a, D-Day. When is the day you don't need us anymore? And it could be, who knows, that we end up in a situation that this D-Day will never come. But if we build towards that, we've done something wrong. What we should be thinking about is, how do we build towards a situation that decentralization means choice? You always have choice, right? And choice is not one company. Choice is multiple companies. Choice is not one database. Choice is multiple interconnected databases, right? And that's what's kind of very unique about the Cardano Foundation, that we are actually building not to stay forever. We're building to ensure that this beautiful blockchain becomes an interconnected play with billions of people, but without the Cardano Foundation in the end.
Yeah, I love that. I love the approach that you're taking here of really thinking about this in terms of, okay, not just how do we get the price of the token up, today or tomorrow or next week or next month, but this is what is the role of this blockchain in 30, 40, 50 years from now? And then what is the role of the foundation in like facilitating that outcome? And ideally, the role of the foundation is that we won't need to exist anymore, right? If we do our job properly, there won't be a need for us anymore, right? It's kind of like a planned obsolescence type of thing, right? Like if we're still around in 50 years, like maybe that's an indicator that we didn't do our job properly, right?
It could also be opposite, right? That the environment just dramatically required it due to some, let's say, I don't know, a law was implemented, or the whole world went together and said, you need that thing, right? But it will not be something which is implemented or guarded, or like, it's not something like the Cardano Foundation will push to be forever. I tell every new starter here, if you're very old, this might be your last job. If you're quite young, this will not be your last job. Huh? So one of the things we need to do here is we need to make you very attractive, right? So I actually sort of measure on that everybody working for the Cardano Foundation should get 2 to 3 job offers every year. If they don't do that, we're doing something wrong, because we're on the edge of target operating models. We're on the edge of what can be done, including technology. And you should be attractive, whether you are an assistant or whether you're an engineer or whether you're an HR. You should be attractive out there, because if you're not, we're not doing enough marketing around what we're actually doing here.
I love that. That's a really clever way of thinking about it, right? If the outside world should be looking at this place and be like, wow, like this is a great place. Like I want to hire people that work at this place, like, because they're doing good stuff, right?
Yeah, and to my great surprise and really happy about it, right? Charles just hired 2 of our main engineers, right? Who's building one of the smart contracting languages, right? And this just shows that, when I arrived here in the Cardano Foundation, we didn't have a lot of engineers and we didn't have a lot of scope, right? But if the people who designed Cardano is now hiring our people, right, it's actually the best that can happen, right? Because it shows that we are also the breeding ground for talent, even for the most critical parts of it, right? So I think this is good. Of course, it's also hard because, you have to keep hiring and training and all those things, right? But I keep thinking, if people work here a few years and they go out and they preach blockchain, not just Cardano, but they preach blockchain and preach how you can do this digital transformation, which is better for everybody on the earth, not just the one person who earns all the money, right? Or the one person who decides everything. I think the world will be a better place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Binance is the largest platform for digital asset trading, with over 250 million users around the world and over 350 trading pairs. Access best-in-class products and services for investors and advanced tools for institutional players. Liquidity matters. Security is non-negotiable. Join Binance today.
I love that overview of the foundation. Really exciting. I love the vision you're bringing to it, and you're kind of holding it with an open hand. Like we're here as basically as a public good almost, and like we want to grow the ecosystem. We want to promote just blockchain generally, even if it's not specifically Cardano, right? And it's a rising tide lifts all boats game essentially. So I love that vision. Let's talk a bit about some of the work you guys have been doing in the Latin America region specifically, and then maybe within that context, within that framing, we can talk about some of the various use cases you guys are excited about, et cetera. But the last couple of years, Cardano generally has been perhaps a bit more active in the Latin America region than maybe some of your peers. You've been doing some various partnerships with some companies and governments. I know Charles Hoskinson spent some time here last year, spoke at a couple of conferences, was kind of meeting with Javier Milei in Argentina. Maybe just tell us a bit more about like what's some of the interesting things happening from the Cardano perspective in Latin America here, and why have you decided to maybe like prioritize this region?
So first and foremost, I think I always try and say we do not prioritize one region over another, because if you prioritize one region over another, you're by default saying, you want to make this succeed and you might forget the needs of the others.
Sure.
So I want to give a big shout out to the LATAM community of Cardano and say thank you very much for doing so much hard work on the grounds there, including one working for us, which is called Afa, which is our business developer. You can probably put his Twitter profile into your show notes or something, so you can look him up, right?
Yeah, he's a great guy.
I think that's a good way, right? But for me, Latin America started for me sort of back in 21, 22 or something like that. Because what we do is we actually do an indirect grant program from the Cardano Foundation, where we basically select stake pools who do a difference, and we stake to them, both in order for ensuring that the network security is as maximum, but it also gives some economic opportunities to these stake pool operators who gives more to the community than what they take. And one of those was a stake pool operator in Argentina, and he later basically did ADA Solar, it's called, and he basically did a partnership after we staked to him with I cannot pronounce it. I'm sorry, my language skills is too much Viking, right? But with UTN Buenos Aires. UTN Buenos Aires is the largest engineering university in Argentina, and they basically done a complete ADA Cardano lab basically there, based on us giving that original thing. And I just visited that in December, and it was really cool to see that they're now running the stake pool in the university. How cool is that?
Oh, cool.
In the stack of the university, they run Cardano stake pool, right? Which means that they're also earning ADA, right? And suddenly they have to have a view on that. What is it? What kind of asset class is it? What about, should we sell the ADA? Should we keep the ADA? How do we invest that? And they already educated, I believe now 40 engineers who specialize in writing smart contracts on Cardano. And I think this is really great. And then I met up with the governor of Entre Rios State, and we basically signed in December. We signed an agreement with the state of Entre Rios, which is, I believe, the third largest state in Argentina, to do a collaboration there. And it's just magnificent, really, right? Because at the same time, I met up with Ibero-America, which is one of the world's largest development banks. They have, basically they have more money they can spend, but they need accountability towards it. And this is one of those use cases which I think is so magnificent in blockchain. You can do these escrow accounts and verifiable things on chain. So what we have right now is actually we have a very large engineering university who is struggling every single day to basically spit out, the best engineers in Latin America, right? And they're not just using blockchain or teaching blockchain, they have it in the engine room of the university. We have the third largest state there, right, who's basically saying we want to have more startups, we want to do more things. And we have a development bank who's ready to invest if they can see that this accountability layer is there. So we're trying to really create a kind of a startup hub environment where it's not about free money, but it is you have the right talent, you have the people who understand blockchain, you have some real problems in the area, and you know how to solve that using blockchain, and you have some political wins there who's basically saying we actually also need to be able to prove to the people outside Argentina that what we're doing is working. And we have this thing on blockchain called trust but verify. So this idea that you can verify that on chain is really, really cool, right? Then we're working with Petrobras, which is a Brazil state-owned energy company. And we signed an agreement with them in 2023 with the Cardano Foundation to do something called CBCA, which is a certification program of the Cardano Academy. And the goal there was not just to upgrade the knowledge in the energy sector about what blockchain is, but Petrobras actually has a big goal about changing the foundation of what Petrobras really stands for, which is, oil, right? And they want to go much more holistic into energy production and potentially even more things, which is not just driven by fossil fuels. And here we've been working with them both around NFT certification, trainings, launching different things. But they also had the first proof of concepts on Cardano. And they, on the other hand, they're working very closely with something called PUC Rio, which is a Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, advancing research and development in blockchain technology. And I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say, but let's say that COP 30, so the big conference is happening in Brazil soon, and a big hope and what we're working towards with Petrobras, and now also with SERPRO. SERPRO is Brazil's largest state-owned IT company. They process around 33 billion annual transactions for 90% of the federal administration. They have, I believe, more than 8,000 employees. So this triangle, right, we're hoping to get something ready, not paid by Cardano, but facilitated by Cardano for the COP conference. And it's about, I can say it's about, certification, it's about origination of fuel. And I think this could be a really amazing place to showcase LATAM on the world stage in terms of verifiable proofs on chain when we speak about physical items such as fuel.
No, that's super interesting, and I love the approach you're taking here with working with some of these companies who are just major players, like Petrobras, obviously massive player in the Brazilian energy sector. SERPRO is the largest, I believe it's the largest state-owned IT company in the world, if I'm not mistaken. And they've been dabbling actually in a lot of interesting kind of blockchain use cases and proof of concepts around identity and things of that nature, which are quite, in the same sort of remit as some of the things that you guys are focusing on. So it seems like a very kind of natural overlap there. And the COPE thing sounds very interesting. I'm sure you're kind of limited with what you can say about it at the moment, but that's definitely something to be watching out for as that progresses. But I would love to maybe, when you're looking at like who should we be kind of brokering deals with, who should we be talking to, how should we be devoting resources in the region to try to get maximum impact or maximum leverage, I guess. How are you guys kind of deciding, like, okay, who should we be, maybe focusing on? Who should we be targeting? What communities should we be perhaps investing in? Maybe how does that sausage get made essentially?
Well, Cardano is so big, as I mentioned before. We have probably around 9 million citizens, and to get citizenship on Cardano, you just need to own a ADA and have a wallet, right? And that basically means you have voting rights and you have economic opportunities. You can participate in security and so on. And I think the first thing. Again, a shout out to the LATAM community. I think in the last, 1 or 2 years, they had over 60 town hall meetings. They've done education, they've done hackathons. Cardano is just really active in Latin America, and it has been for.
I wanted to, if I can pause it. This is something I wanted to ask as well. Is like Cardano does seem to have a very active community here, perhaps like vis-a-vis maybe other, chain communities. And any idea why that is? Like, it just seems like there's always Cardano folks running around doing stuff. Like, what is it that's exciting these folks so much?
So obviously we spoke about my heritage before, right? So it's very Scandinavian, right? So I just can't speak on behalf of them, right? But what I do notice when I interact with it is that I think where blockchain has a lot of promise in the, let's say, in the 1 to 5 year range, right, is in places where either status quo is not acceptable today, or that people has ambitions and drive to get things done. And to the first, I just don't know Latin America enough, but my outside in view is that I certainly think that a lot of people feel that Latin America has a lot of growth opportunities and has a lot of opportunities for changing status quo. And for the second, I can definitely say that the people I've been collaborating with in Latin America, they get things done. They literally get things done. They are not afraid of not just dreaming, but of executing, right? That when I speak about UTN, for instance, right? The fact that we have a fully an ancient engineering university who's struggling just to, spit out normal engineers, and now they start spitting out blockchain engineers based on so little help and support, just because they know this is the future and they want to be renowned worldwide, not just in Argentina, but worldwide, right? I think this is one of the reasons why this happens. And I think what fits well with Cardano is, of course, the mission and the vision, but also the fact that we keep fighting for that you don't need to have a passport, you don't need to have a salary account, you don't need to be allowed. So there's no for instance, Polkadot, right? You need to be able to run a version of the blockchain or a parachain. You need to go into a voting, a bidding war, or you need to get acceptance from a foundation or something like that. If you want to build and deploy on Cardano, you can do that. Nobody's going to say no, right? And I think this is extremely powerful. And my job is to ensure that nobody comes and starts saying no, But de facto, a true public permissionless blockchain like Cardano gives you these opportunities which you don't know natively might have where you are, right? And we don't judge you, right? And I think that's something people really appreciate, I think what the other part, which is somehow good and bad, right, is if there's free money floating around, this can be a real issue, but it can also be a real opportunity. And Cardano do have this large venture project called Catalyst, where we are sort of I think last year, the last 12 months, we've been, issuing, these large rounds of 15 million ADA. And the fact that everybody, no matter what education or what, background you have, you can apply for one of those grants, and the community will then come together and optimize your proposal and vote on your proposal. Gives opportunity for people to get things running, but also to close the teams. Sometimes you have a great opportunity, you have a great idea, but you don't know any engineers who can do it. Or you have some engineers who don't have business experience. Or you need a lawyer. Or you want to understand, why didn't it work the last 5 other times people suggested this, right? And we have this really cool community of innovators who is together in Catalyst, who makes this happen, right? And I think that gives a lot of opportunities compared to, 5 white guys in a boardroom somewhere saying you get the money and you don't, right? This idea that you use the human brain to do that. And yes, we can improve a lot here, right? If you look through the stats, a lot of the things we were funded might not have gone as well as we would have liked it to go, and so on, right? But that's why we have community governance, right? That's why we have transparency. Transparency is a very bad thing, When you have transparency, and you have accurate data, you know what you need to do. So you just have to go and do it. If you just have a bad feeling that something is rotten, you say in them, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, right? For instance, right? It's not actionable, but blockchain makes things actionable. And the fact that we have these things running, we know what we need to do to get things done, and the community know this, and we keep iterating to get this better. And this is again a place where when people can get jobs and they can get opportunities. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you've been approaching this, because I think across crypto the last, maybe 4 or 5 years, there's been kind of this mindset shift in terms of like, how do we build the community, right? There was, I think back in the early days, it was, let's spin up these grant programs and let's just kind of throw money at random people, and like hopefully they do something interesting. And then it's like, okay, let's do more hackathons, right? And then people are kind of going around, you have these kind of professional hackathon hackers where they kind of submit the same project to like multiple different chains or whatever. And there's not really like a perfect way to do it, right? Just everyone's just kind of, trying to figure it out as they go, right? And it seems like you guys have found maybe an alternative here that's really more, okay, how do we distribute resources in a way that's like really best optimized for, supporting the folks that are, really vested, and trying to make sure it's an inclusive, transparent process. And it's not just, some random committee that's just saying like yes or no, whatever. But it's really, there's kind of full buy-in from everybody essentially, which I think is helpful for at least preserving the integrity of the program, but also like maximally kind of optimizing how these things get distributed, right? So that's super interesting.
Whether we get it right or wrong is important, but not everything. The fact that we are leaving this footprint in the database for other people to do something which is even more innovative and get even more accountability on it means that we are moving the world forward in terms of this business model. And the same goes with our, what we call Voltaire, right? Which is this idea now that we have full community governance with a tri-party government basically deciding over Cardano, right? It's exactly the same. Is this model perfect? No, it's not. But this is the first time that 9 million citizens had full transparency and full digital identity on a database. So if something skews in the wrong direction compared to what you expected, you can see exactly what happened. And that means that academics and universities and other people, they now have the data, and you can apply a machine learning model on top of it, or a large language model on top of it. And you have insights to make even better governance, right? And we never had that before. If you want to know in the USA of America who voted and how many people had a right identity and all of that, you need, I don't know how many NDAs and political access and all of that. This is not public knowledge, right? We made that public knowledge. And that, of course, is going to be a big attack vector against Cardano, because people say, oh, I can prove this was not perfect. But I think about it differently. I think about what kind of value does this add to society going forward, to the social systems. And I think this is the powerful element. The more data points of real actors, real behavior, real, hand on the stove, the better it is for the world population.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. I want to switch gears here slightly and talk a bit on the regulation side, because I know you were pretty heavily involved in a lot of the MiCA discussions and negotiations in Europe, and obviously these rules went into effect earlier this year, so we at least have some, at least a quarter of preliminary data and like how things are going. And a lot of countries in Latin America here are progressing pretty quickly on the regulatory front as well. So I wanted to just get a quick reflection from you on, are there maybe any advice or takeaways based on the MiCA experience that you think would be applicable as Latin America is looking to implement, similar regulatory structures?
Yeah. So under Chatham rules, I would like to quote one of the persons who was instrumental in doing MiCA. And what he said is, Fred, beware. You need to get the best of the worst ideas, not the worst of the worst ideas. And what he meant about that was, when you look at MiCA, is very isolated to a certain type of stable coins and to the infrastructure on which they run on. And you ask yourself, why didn't they touch DeFi or yield farming or loads of other things, right? And the reason for that is that there's a lot of innovation and a lot of try and error who still needs to spin out here. What was amazing about MiCA was the policy work, right? With the speed from when they started until all the European Union kind of agreed on it is truly magnificent. Is it the perfect regulational set? No, it's not. But what they did really well was there was a lot of countries who had to cave in and had to sort of accept that this is now the rules. And I think in Latin America, I would go even further. Don't try and do something which is really good for Brazil or really good for Panama or really good for Argentina. Because what you do then is you isolate yourself in the world economy and you think that this is a supply chain who only touches a very limited amount of space and opportunity. What you need to do is you need to think about, how do I become, and this is really hard, right? And people say this is not possible. But you can try and align with the world leaders in blockchain and cryptocurrencies when you do this. If you do that, the likelihood that you're not only going to get a temporary boost of your economy in terms of creating transparency and jobs and opportunities, but you also start thinking about how does this work for exporting these products and importing these products. Because what you want to do with emerging technologies, you want to accept that emerging technologies does not accept borders, at least not physical borders. So when you think about gene therapy and gene cutting, if you have a mouse where you splice the DNA, it doesn't stop and show its passport, right? It runs across the border and it breathes, right? And you get new mice with a new string of DNA. When you think about how the internet works and you think about digital enabled products and decentralized databases and how quantum computing and other things are going to affect the world population, it's going to be nearly impossible to have this virtual border standing there. So what I always say to policymakers and regulators is, yes, enforcement are important. Transparency about what's right and wrong is also important. But try to think about, how does this benefit your constitution in the next 10 to 20 years? And to do that, you need more than your country's population. You need to think about how it anchors into a global supply chain of emerging technologies and emerging economies at large. So do a little bit less, make it like really clear what you're trying to achieve, and think about how you export it. That's a very good starting point.
No, it's very well put. That's a very good answer. And I think even in this world we live in right now with like tariffs and protectionism, and they kind of people are running around with their hair on fire about this issue, and we're sort of deglobalizing or whatever. I think it is important to, there might be, a valid reason to have tariffs on products here and there, but like, look, like the broader context is as these technologies continue to emerge, these are not things that accept traditional political borders, right? So it's like, we have to think about these things in terms of how they fit into how the world's going to be in 20, 30 years, not in 6 months, right?
But think about this for a second, right? When we speak about those tariffs, right, which is right now, like all over the place, right? And we see markets correcting and everybody's scrambling, right? It is virtually impossible right now for us, even for insiders, to be 100% certain that we look at the right data, right? So we see statements from one country saying, oh, actually, the import taxes on that is only this, and this is not reciprocal and stuff like that, right? But what if the world trade was run on a global permissionless blockchain, protected by thousands of entities and private individuals from around the world, who does not look at the incentive of the data structure, but look at the value that this database is immutable, right? And now you look at the data and says, would tariffs be a good option for what I'm trying to achieve? And if the answer to that is yes, well, it's your right, it's your nation state, right? But if you have a slight amount of doubt that the data you're looking at to take that decision might not be the right thing, I would just caution and say, you might want to think twice, right? Because I think everything is so interconnected these days, and we just have to agree that after COVID, we had countries who's been believing each other since the Second World War stopped. They thought, we were equal in terms of data scrutiny, and suddenly they couldn't even believe if the COVID vaccine was done or not done, or if it even worked. Was there even a COVID, right? And this is like, I'm talking about Italy, Switzerland, for instance, or Germany, France, places where, they're even within the same medical healthcare sort of standard under the World Health Organization, but suddenly didn't trust each other anymore. So when we think about tariffs and other things, I actually do think that the world will be much more beneficial. Might not be comfortable when we have the right data and we see what really is happening. But when you take large decisions, I think good data will help you a lot.
No, that's super interesting. As you're mentioning that, I was thinking back to when I started my career. I worked for Financial Times, and I remember I was talking to our world trade editor one day, and he was showing me the data on how like the world collectively runs a trade surplus. And it's like, well, how does that work, right? It's like, well, because everyone's misreporting their data. So it's like, so how could this possibly? How could because the data is not. I mean, it's like directionally accurate, but it's not like actually accurate, right? Everyone's misreporting this in some way or another. So like
and that's actually one of the powerful things about Cardano, because Cardano borrowed the UTXO model from Bitcoin, right? And then created something called extended UTXO. And one of the large problems about data on a blockchain is that you end up in these super large databases where everything has to be in sync, right? So you cannot just have a surplus. You have to be actually well balanced, right? And the extended UTXO model of Cardano allows you to basically have local synchronization of the database, which basically allows it to scale and be much larger than things you run on the account-based model. So it creates speed in exactly those models to basically be able to verify the data.
Amazing. So we're running out of time here. We have like 5-6 minutes left here, but I wanted to ask you two quick questions. I guess first one is to be a total dereliction of duty if I didn't ask about this, but ADA was included in the social media posts from Donald Trump a few weeks back as being part of the strategic crypto stockpile. Things kind of went a little bit crazy, and then we haven't really heard a whole lot about it since then, aside from, at least in terms of the non-Bitcoin assets that could be potentially included here. What's going on with that? And then maybe talk a bit about more your future plans for engaging in Latin America over the coming 6, 9, 12 months, and then we'll wrap up there.
Sure. So I think for this whole discussion about whether or not digital assets should be part of a treasury, and like a nation state run treasury or reserve, depending on how you cut the lines there, right? I was super happy to see that there is an intent to add digital assets in there. And I was also super happy that it mentioned more digital assets than just Bitcoin. I think from a maturity perspective, we have to be a little bit careful about the size of a budget compared to the market cap of the asset, because some of these digital assets, I mean, they if you start taking control over trillions of dollars, you might actually sway the security mechanisms and other things in there. So, but part of my decentralization brain is saying, oh, be careful here, right? Are we adding more risk into blockchain, but we are de-risking a nation state? And what's the trade-off there? And the reason why I was quite happy about Cardano was mentioned is that I think it's a part of recognizing the work we've been doing for many, many years in terms of operational resilience, working with global regulators and auditors around the world to ensure that we have disaster recovery and other things in place, because we are the blockchain who has the most code changes and has not been down and missed a block since 2017. And I think this is a very unique way of looking at it, right? Now, as I said before, I think Bitcoin was created more as a real asset class, and Cardano was created as more of a third-generation blockchain, and we spend a little bit of time looking at those kind of things. So I think the fact that the administration has been looking a bit further, I think that's very, very healthy, and I'm very happy that they do that. For the actual operational part, what's kind of interesting is that, of course, that the US state own Bitcoin already, because they're seizing that. But to the best of our knowledge, they don't own any ADA, because there's not been any ADA to seize, apparently. So I think that's quite positive because it means that
or criminals
Cardano
don't use ADA, maybe. Bad guys don't use ADA. Maybe that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, you can look at it in different ways. You can also think about the Bitcoin is more of an asset, right? And ADA is more of a gas fee, and ADA is very much used in enterprise use cases from some of the ones we spoke about today, right? But also, other large use cases, right? Where Bitcoin is very much a financial instrument. I do think you can still do a lot with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is in many ways much larger, right? So maybe there's also something about the sizing of this, right? But I was quite happy I saw it as a recognition of Cardano and the Cardano community and the work they've been doing around the world to establish this baseline. So I think that's something we can be quite proud of, right? It's another nut on the shoulder of Cardano. What I would love to see even more is, of course, that you use this extended UTXL model of Cardano, and you start actually putting the balance sheet and the P&L statement and the financial transaction of the state on a blockchain, basically saying, if you are a citizen in the country, well, why not? Why should you not be able to go and have a look at the numbers? And why shouldn't you be allowed to add advanced computer logic and AI models on top of it to give you an interpretation of what those are? Because not all of us are accountants, but we might have questions, right? And by us naturally being interested in that without taking too much resources, because it costs a lot to be transparent, right? And then you have to answer questions. And when you answer questions, you're diluting resources away from your real job, right? But if we can create sort of a self-service environment on a public permissionless blockchain like Cardano and allow the citizens to feel that they can certainly trust how the state is run, and they can use large language models as an interpretation layer, and it makes people more interested in that, I think you will see voter participation goes up. You will see people being more engaged in the local community. You will see a whole change in how society is. And I think that would be an amazing place. And if you want to see how that looks, you can go on Cardano and you can buy some ADA and you can participate in the world's largest DAO, because this is the direction we are on. Huh? And again, whether it works or doesn't matter, because we're going to leave those footprints for nation states to pick this up on in the future.
No, I love that. And then, just wrapping up, love your any final comments on Cardano in Latin America. And then is there a particular call to action that you'd have for folks in the region who might be listening to this?
I think fostering public-private partnership to enhance government services and drive innovation across the region in general LATAM is really cool. And it's something we are going to focus more on. Supporting financial inclusion and blockchain-based solutions, such as the one I spoke about, the development bank, and how we enable, universities to spit out people who get real job and get more investment in the country through this sort of circular economy. Promoting cross-border collaboration to establish standardized blockchain frameworks. Like I said before, with the mice, right? You want to get to a situation that not one country is doing economic arbitrage with a really good regulation for blockchain, but they can't scale. You actually want to have the whole region to hang together, and even better, the region to hang together with the world. It's tough, huh? But you have, the LATAM has shown really good progress in many countries. And I think it might not be too bad right now that you have some time to focus on LATAM and not being focused too much on being ruled by others, huh? So I think that's a positive opportunity. And then advancing digital identity solutions, which empower the citizens, and respecting privacy, very important, and the regulatory requirements. I think this is really what I see Cardano can add with in the next 3 to 5 years in LATAM. Huh? And the call for action is not surprisingly, right? But 5 years ago, Cardano was a dream. Now Cardano is here. You can run Visa on Cardano. You can run a nation state on Cardano. So if you want to do something on Cardano right now, it's a good time to find a business model you believe in, whatever field you're in, and then deploy some blockchain into it, right? And then, let it grow. Let it grow. Build things on blockchain. We don't need to build more blockchains necessarily. We can always make it a bit better, faster, cheaper, right? But right now, you can run a lot on Cardano. I don't see a lot of use cases where from the get-go says this is not a good idea, huh? So we're now going into how do we build businesses, sustainable long-term businesses on Cardano, who can go through the generations of wealth creation, huh?
That's amazing. Thanks for leaving us with that final thought. And very impressive what you guys have been building out, the vision behind it. Especially I think now the zeitgeist in 2025 is really everyone's just focusing on stable coins and how do we make payments faster and these types of things. And that's obviously a very valid use case, but for at least for me personally, it's not like really like the reason thing that excites me about crypto. It's like, sure, we'll take, it helps, right? It's innovation, but I think the stuff that really excites me about crypto is just like, how can we really just like transform society? How can we create alternatives to existing institutions that have not been fulfilling their potential, have not been fulfilling their promises to their constituents? How can we create competition in some of these areas, right? And that's the stuff that really excites me. And I think that's what excites me about the potential of this technology in this region, is that you just do have a lot of institutions that unfortunately have just not fulfilled their obligations to the people that they are obliged to be serving. And I think we're seeing in real time, like blockchain really helping to create alternatives to these structures in competition, right? So, and I think what you're talking about, everything you guys are doing and everything you're discussing and the vision is very aligned with that. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing, and especially the fact that you're very, very proactive here in this region. So I guess on behalf of everyone here, I would just say thank you for that work and for that vision. So
well, thank you. I mean, there's no way we could do this without amazing podcast journalists like you, amazing community members who goes above and beyond and knocks in those doors and talks to those people who refuse to change, right? I think it's a culture thing. I think LATAM, they want change, and they're not the people who sits and pray. They do something about it. So thank you for that, huh?
Well, Frederik, really appreciate your time today. How can folks find you if they want to follow you or get in touch or learn more?
Well, I'm not the most active on social media. I'm trying to be better. It's one of the things the LATAM community always keeps saying, Fred. More on Twitter, more on LinkedIn, more on those places. But, feel free to have a look at my LinkedIn profile, my Twitter profile. But, of course, CardanoFoundation.org has a lot of resources. And, as I said, if you really need to find me or get a hold on me, get a hold on one of my team members. And if you can convince them, which I'm pretty sure you can, then I always have like 5-10 minutes to listen to something. But I am very, as you hopefully hear also today, I'm very pragmatic. I want things to happen on chain, and I want the people to be able to verify that. I think blockchain has a huge potential, and we haven't seen anything yet. What we saw before was a dream. Now we have it, and now we have to prove that what we have can actually change society as we know it. Huh?
Well, thank you again, Frederik, for your time, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back with another episode of Brazil Crypto Report.